right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting Daily Vlog. This is the Daily Vlog number 40, and today's going to be a short one because I am absolutely out of it. Still having issues with nightmares, which is lots of fun. And my brain has come up, like, it's not even like I'm having the same nightmare over and over again. Like, each time, the little bits that I can remember, completely new fear that I didn't know that I had. But I would wake up in an absolute panic each at a time. So yeah, that kind of sucks. I did finally get the last 13th Age Designing New Dragons recorded. It's a bit rough, just because I did it at like 4 in the morning yesterday, so that was fun. But I just got to get uploaded, create a title card or a thumbnail, and timestamps. And then, yeah, that'll finally be good to go, and I can move on to whatever my next RPG is going to be. So that was nice. Yeah, I've also been I have been slowly working my way through Final Fantasy 16, which is a crazy good game. I don't understand how it wasn't bigger than it was. And I think it did okay sales-wise, and it got great reviews and everything like that. But people seem to think that there was something wrong with it. There isn't. It's a fantastic game. The cast is great. Sid is the coolest dude ever. And yeah, I'm not going to go into any spoilers or anything, but it's a massively fun game. And I guess the thing that being a dungeon master and a game master, and I've mentioned this before, the thing that tends to get me excited about like a campaign setting is what kind of interesting stories does this inspire me to create interesting stories in it. And the world of Final Fantasy 16 is really interesting. And as far as I can tell, I actually don't, at the point in the story that I'm at, I actually don't know. Like, it's obvious to me that there's going to be some like big lore drop bombs that are going to just massively change how I look at the world. But as of right now, to just kind of give everyone an idea of like the base setting, which I think is really interesting, and I think it'd be a lot of fun to actually run an RPG in. The world itself, which I can't remember what they call it, basically has 2 continents, Storm and the other one. And between these 2 continents, there are these giant crystals called mother crystals. And basically each crystal has a nation that kind of grew up around it. And the thing about these mother crystals is, as far as I can tell, it looks like they basically create what's called ether, which is the magic energy. And they basically grow these crystal shards that everybody in the world uses for everything. It allows anyone to be able to cast magic. And so a lot of times these crystal shard things are essential for the population to live. Like a water well. The way a normal water well works is you drill down until you get below the groundwater level. And that makes the water pool. And you draw it up, and that's how you get fresh water. The way wells work in Final Fantasy 16 is you put a crystal shard in there that's attuned to water, and it literally creates water. Or like to run a forge, instead of going out and, chopping down trees, turning it into charcoal and other forms of fuel that you can use to create really, really high temperature heat. You just get a crystal, and that creates the really high temperature heat that you need to be able to do forging in that. And that's basically how everything works in this society. Is the kind of normal way of doing stuff is supplanted by these crystal shards. Well, in addition to crystal shards, there are also people born that have a natural affinity to be able to use magic, and they're called bearers. However, because crystal shards are such a kind of controlled commodity, and they're so essential, like magic is so essential for the world to work, bearers are treated as a commodity as opposed to actual living human beings. And so they actually get this mark, this brand on their face as soon as it's detected that they have this inherent ability to cast magic, and then they literally become objects. The other thing about bearers is they're afflicted by this thing called the Curse of the Crystal, which is basically the more magic they use, the faster they turn to stone and die. So crystal shards have limited magic available into them, and bearers have limited magic available to them. And then there's one other group of people that are magically attuned, and they are called dominants. In dominants, the thing that makes them special is they are basically the human embodiment of an icon, a summon. So things like Phoenix, Bahamut, Odin, Titan, each one of them has a corresponding dominant, and the dominant can do this thing called priming, where they literally turn into that icon, or they can do this thing semi-priming, where they just look really cool and they can use their element, the element associated with their icon. And so those people, for whatever reason, apparently dominants are kind of respected, because all of the dominants tend to be of noble lineage, because basically once one dominant dies, you can only have one dominant per icon, and there's only one icon per element. So I think there's 8 elements, so total there can only ever be 8 icons. Or at least that's how it works at the beginning of the game. And so these dominants, basically what happens is when dies, a new person is born that is the new dominant of that icon, and it tends to follow bloodlines. And so the dominants in general are all basically nobility, and they are somehow related to the kind of ruling families or ruling organizations of the various nations around. So that's the world that Final Fantasy XVI exists in, and I find it fascinating. I mean, there's kind of the commentary of treating people as property and how evil and disgusting it is, especially since as you play the game, the main character Clive is effectively relegated to the role of branded or a bearer. And so he kind of gets to experience that discrimination firsthand. And I think one of the reasons why I don't have a problem with depicting the worst parts of society in RPGs is exactly what happens in Final Fantasy XVI, which is you get to fight against this horrible, disgusting practice and actually beat it. Which doesn't happen a lot in the real world. In the real world, there's a lot of horrible, disgusting shit going on right now. And a lot of times, even if you do fight it in whatever way you can, there's a lot more losses than there are wins. And so I like something like Final Fantasy XVI because you get to win, and you get to feel like you are stopping an injustice. And I've seen that in other tabletop RPGs. Like, that's kind of the reason why you would allow bigotry into your game, to kind of show just how disgusting it is and then to triumph over it. And I think that can be a very powerful thing for people to experience. And it can even inspire them to fight against these very real things in the real world, which is significantly harder than it is in a tabletop RPG or in a video game. But you still can win. So yeah, like I said, I think it's a fascinating world. I love most of the worlds of Final Fantasy in general. I think almost all of them have kind of interesting aspects to them. I'm one of the weird people that actually really liked Final Fantasy VIII. And part of it has to do with the fact that Final Fantasy VIII, a weird thing happened when I was a kid. I basically had to get rid of every game that had any reference to magic in it because it was sinful and evil, which meant that I got rid of a lot of amazing, awesome games, including The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, Secret of Mana, actually all the Zelda games, a bunch of really awesome games I had to sell and get rid of because they were evil and sinful. Well, years later, I found Final Fantasy VIII in a store, and for whatever reason, I was allowed to buy that. And so Final Fantasy VIII was the first Final Fantasy that I was allowed to play again. And I eventually went back and played Final Fantasy VII, which is a great game, but I will always, if for no other reason than just the nostalgia built into it, I will always have a very soft spot in my heart for Final Fantasy VIII. And the world of Final Fantasy VIII, again, I find fascinating. You have these sorceresses that have this unimaginable power, and again, they kind of get used as commodities, though there isn't the kind of slavery aspect that is inherent in Final Fantasy XVI. This is more of kind of manipulation and control rather than outright declaring them property or anything like that. But in addition to that, you have the Lunar Cry, which I find is a really, really interesting way to explain where monsters could come from. And you have the Garden system. So basically, you have these small military schools that are all around the world, and their purpose is to train kids from a very young age to be able to eventually fight the sorceress who's going to do bad things. We just know that's how it's going to work because that's how it works in history. Yeah, in addition to that, you have these super powerful beings called Guardian Forces that you can basically link with in order to gain power and abilities and things like that. And so, like I said, the whole world itself is really interesting. And I think the story that they tell in Final Fantasy VIII is interesting enough. It's not, I don't think it is a bad story. I think they do, I think the emphasis on the Squall Renoa romance took away from an interesting story that they could have told. And I totally get, the idea that they were messing around with romance because Final Fantasy VI romance started to become a really big deal. In Final Fantasy VII, the romance in there between Aerith and Cloud and Tifa was a really big deal. And so they're like, no, we want to write a love story. And I just don't think they wrote a very compelling love story. But the rest of the story, the rivalry between Squall and Cypher, the whole kind of machinations of various nations trying to control these super powerful people. Time travel was weird in the there, but overall, I think it's an interesting world that I think could have a lot of fun running a game in. So, yeah, this is what I do when I play video games is I look at the world in and of itself and go, could I make something interesting? Like, it's one of the reasons why I love the Mana series so much, because every game in it has such a well-developed world that everything exists in. Like, Secret of Mana probably, well, I guess Final Fantasy Adventure probably has the least well-developed world. And that's because it's this very, very linear story of bad thing happens when you're a kid, and you go through all these steps to take revenge on the person that wronged you. And that's kind of what Final Fantasy Adventure is. But once you get to Secret of Mana, that's where I really feel that they started creating actual worlds. And the world of Secret of Mana is really interesting. You have the Empire that's trying to resurrect the Mana Fortress, and you have these little resistance groups, and you have all these other countries, like the Mushroom People and the Dwarves and Gaia's Navel, and just really, really interesting cultures that exist. And then you get to Trials of Mana, which was Seiken Densetsu 3 for years and years and years. And they have even better developed worlds where you actually have all the different elemental stones is what they have instead of seeds from Secret of Mana. Each one has its own nation that was built around it and kind of embodies the values of that particular thing, and they're all going to war against each other, and that's really cool. And then you get to Legend of Mana, and a lot of people don't like Legend of Mana simply because it's very episodic in how it does its storytelling, and it's very kind of random almost because of the artifact system and everything like that. But there's actually 3 main storylines that are in there that if you complete any one of them, you get to go to the final confrontation and beat the game. And because of that, you can actually miss a crap ton of stuff. Like the first time I beat Legend of Mana, I focused entirely on the Escad and Pearl storyline. Which is basically about the Jumi and their kind of crystal hearts and things like that. And that was a really interesting storyline. But I completely missed, there's an entire storyline about dragons fighting each other. And they 2 of the main dragons each have their own dragon knight that you can recruit to be an ally. And that story is really, really interesting. And then the final story, if I remember correctly, it involves Diana and someone else. And I've never actually completed that story. But again, the world itself, they have these cultures and they have these groups and everything. And the world itself is very, very robust and interesting. So, yeah, I like that stuff. I'm excited about Visions of Mana. I hope that they spend as much time creating a really interesting, unique world as they have in other Mana Giga games. We can only hope. Please, please, Square Enix, do not screw up Visions of Mana like you did, what was it? The last Mana game, it was a PS2 game, and it was bad. It was impressively bad. They wanted it to kind of be like a prequel kind of thing, despite the fact that the Mana series is technically very similar to Final Fantasy series, where they have similar themes, but the worlds aren't related much at all. So, anyway, that's what I've been doing. I'm tired. I hurt. But hopefully tomorrow will be better. I believe I have almost a full cast tomorrow for Tears of the Realm, so that should be super fun. And we have a guest playing with us, which will also be super fun. So, anyway, I'm going to head out. It's all for me today. See you guys tomorrow. All right? Bye-bye.